Morning, guys. Well, morning here. I've decided to do something a little bit different. The 70s and the occult nature of television and music had a profound effect upon me that I believe affected me throughout my life. And I have looked at it before. I've done a lot of thinking about the effect that some of the stuff that I was watching affected me then and since. So this is sort of a personal look. I'm going to look at films and television here, and in a later video I'll look a bit more at other aspects like music and fashion and entertainment generally. So the Twilight Zone was sort of like a precursor to what came later in the 70s. It was an American series that had like little twisty, creepy stories, and it was incredibly popular. People have always liked ghost stories, always been interested in the supernatural. We like to be frightened. So I did a search, the occult 70s, and this came up, which to me is a very good sort of visual representation of how I see the 70s now, looking back. I think that the place where I was actually raised was a little hotbed of satanic activity back then, which I was unaware of at the time, being a young teen. But it does have a little bit of a dark history. So before we go any further, let's just have a look and see what Satanism is, yeah? So we'll have a look at Wiki first to get the generic description. So it's a group of ideological and philosophical beliefs based on Satan. Contemporary religious practice of Satanism began with the founding of the Church of Satan in 1966. So 1966 is actually 666 if you invert the 9. Although a few historical precedents exist, and of course it became a founded church, an official church in 1966, but it's been going on for a lot longer than that. We talk about the French Revolution. The idea of a vast satanic conspiracy reached new heights with the influential Taxil host. An 1890s exposure by Leo Taxil intended to mock not only Freemasonry, but also the Catholic Church's opposition to it. So they were accused of murdering children, sexually abusing children. In most of these cases there is no corroborating evidence. Okay. Now, have a look at the types of Satanism. Do all Satanists believe the same thing? Oh. There are many branches of Satanism. In fact, modern Satanism is best considered an umbrella term for a wide variety of sets and beliefs. They share three characteristics, though: an interest in magic, played out as psychodrama or mystical events; a creation of a community which defines the roles of membership as somewhere between people who share a mystical pursuit, those who live according to a set of religious tenets, and a philosophy that thrives on nonconformity. And that is where they concentrated on this nonconformity. By the 1970s, by the late 1960s, the cult of the teenager was pretty well established, confusing our parents and making us bolshy and rebellious. Satanists themselves range from individuals who simply follow a self-centered philosophy to organised groups with meeting houses and scheduled events. So you get your lone wizards and witches, and so Michael Aquino, the member of the hierarchy of the Church of Satan, and Lilith Sinclair broke away from the Church of Satan on philosophical grounds and formed the splinter group Temple of Set. And then Luciferians, because Luciferianism and Satanism is not the same. Among the minor sects is Luciferianism, whose adherents see it as a separate church of Satanism, which combines elements of rational and theistic forms. It is largely a theistic branch, although there are some who see Satan, called Lucifer, as symbolic rather than an actual being. Luciferians use the term Lucifer in its literal sense. The name means light bringer in Latin. He's seen as a creature of enlightenment, a bit like the Lord of Light in Game of Thrones, eh? Okay, right, when it all started for me, really, was with a series of television programmes in the late 60s called Tales of Mystery and Imagination. Now these were creepy little black and white, atmospheric, scary retells of well-known short stories by various authors. M.R. James was a favourite, H.E. Bates was a favourite, J.G. Ballard. So they produced all these creepy little stories, and I used to watch them with my mum and my sister, and we used to get very, very scared, very creeped out. I can remember quite a few of them. To this day I can remember The Fall of the House of Usher, Edgar Allan Poe story, Telltale Heart, and this one. And there's only, I think, 6 or 7 full episodes left. They were on from 1966 to 1970. And this one, The Casting of the Runes, which is an M.R. James short story, really creeped me out, and there's only a little bit of it left. Now I have an M.R. James collected ghost stories book here, which I still read. I still read this stuff. It really affected me back then, and I still have this sort of like propensity to look at dark stuff, the darker stuff. And what is interesting about M.R. James as well is that a lot of his short stories are set in churchyards and in churches, and involve like evil entities in churches. And so some of them, like you got one called The Treasure of Abbot Thomas, the Stalls of Barchester Cathedral, The Residence of Whitminster, an episode of Cathedral History, Canon Alberic Scrapbook. So they're all sort of got this sort of like connection with the church and evil. So Casting the Runes. So you can see how grainy and black and white and creepy it was. So in The Casting of the Runes, this chap here is a newspaper critic, and he's criticised the work of some guy who's a Satanist, he's evil. And this guy casts runes, he casts the symbols, which means that he's going to die. Because you cast the runes, you write something on a piece of paper, and then somebody has to give it to the person, and they have to accept it. So he picks up this piece of paper and it's got the runes on it. Can't understand where it's come from. And he gets on the train, on the bus. Look at the architecture. Look at the... it's so primitive. Anyway, he... for some reason, on the window of the carriage, suddenly he sees a memoriam plaque to him. So he gets really, really upset about this, goes to the bus place, finds out that nothing was there, it was etched into the glass, but now there's nothing there the next day. And so that's the sort of thing. There's another one that M.R. James did called Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, which is pretty bloody terrifying. And this is somebody else who was around a lot back then, Christopher Lee. And Hammer Horror, there were all sorts of like creepy vampire films. This is sort of like sexuality, these dark sort of sexual strangers going into these maidens' rooms. You can see where he's had his heart cut out in the past. And then off we go for the love bite. I was obsessed with Christopher Lee. I loved all this stuff. Absolutely loved it. Look at him. I mean, what? Young girls watching this crap. Now we got Twilight, of course. Same thing. Come on, get on with it. Come on, Christopher. Questionable looking girl. Still, you know. That's for another video. God, he's took her outside now. Anyway, you get the idea. It's like long prolonged, you know. Then we have all these other vampire women and stakes being driven through hearts, and you have a vampire killer and intense stories. But the one that got me was this one. The Devil Rides Out. Now, The Devil Rides Out was originally a book written by a guy called Dennis Wheatley. And Dennis Wheatley wrote quite a few of these satanic novels, including one called The Satanist, which I've read. Devil Rides Out, The Devil a Daughter, The Haunting of Toby Jug. He wrote a lot of these very, very creepy. Very English. So in The Devil Rides Out, they have to make a magic circle and get in this magic circle, and the Goat of Mendes turns up. I was learning all these sorts of terms for this dark sort of magic. So it's all pretty ghastly stuff, and we were all watching this. Now, our local cinema used to run all night Hammer horror films. I'm going to close this down because it's making the computer run slow. So this is about Dennis Wheatley. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about what happened with how I got exposed to this. We were always moving house when I was young, because we had a big family and we were just always finding better accommodation. And we moved to this house, and I wasn't getting on very well with my dad at that time. There was a lot of arguments. I was 13, 14 years old, always arguing, always shouting and bawling, and it was a horrible atmosphere at home. And a neighbour asked me to babysit. And she was a very strange sort of woman, but she paid really well. And she didn't have any television. And she used to go out for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And I found a little row of books on the bookshelf in her front room. And they were all Dennis Wheatley, and they were all the occult ones. The first one I took was The Devil Rides Out, and I was just addicted. So I started to read it. I asked if I could borrow it. She said yes. And then I worked my way through her shelf, and I became completely and totally obsessed with Satanism, Dennis Wheatley, the occult. It was exciting, it was scary. Yeah. At the same time, there was a lot of this around as well. Same sort of era. Pan Book of Horror Stories. They had the Pan Book of Ghost Stories and the Pan Book of Horror Stories. And I read pretty much all of these. I had that one. I remember having that one. I had that one. I had that one. I had that one. And I used to read them from it to bed at night. I had that one. And nobody said a word. The reading of the Dennis Wheatley stopped when I started to literally have the worst nightmares ever. Just really, really bad nightmares. Yeah, the Jesus movement in Christianity at the same time as all this was going on, and they were sort of occulting us with all this imagery and dark sort of like magic. The Jesus movement was kicking off in America, and it sort of spread, and everybody was getting very happy clappy, and called them Jesus freaks. And there were lots and lots of musicians who became involved in it. The Campus Crusade for Christ. I didn't hear a thing about this. It's never touched me. House band, Dogwood, famous musicians who, and none of these I have heard, because I guess they took the Christian path, the right path. I look at the music side of it another time. I just wanted to have a little look at this, and in particular, Dennis Wheatley. So Dennis Wheatley worked for MI6. He was the son of a winemaking family, and even back then at college he created his own secret society, joined the military, fought in World War I, and then he was tasked with military intelligence, and after the war he was introduced to Aleister Crowley. Right, let's get this. The fact that I had read extensively about ancient religions gave me some useful background, but I required up-to-date information about occult circles in this country. My friend Tom Dryberg, who then lived in a mews flat just behind us in Queensgate, proved most helpful. He introduced me to Aleister Crowley, the Reverend Montague Summers, and Rollo Ahmed. Who'd have thought, eh? You know, just living over the back. So his wife worked for MI6 as well, so the pair of them, they were like a spy pair. Let's go back up, because this is interesting. In May 1940, following a chance conversation between his wife and her passenger while she was a driver for MI5, Wheatley was commissioned to write a series of papers on various strategic aspects of the war. His papers were read at the highest levels. Then he worked in Churchill's basement fortress as one of the country's small handful of deception planners. So she worked for MI5, he worked for MI6, including writing anti-German and anti-Russian occult spy fiction. So they were constant visitors to Crowley's flat, but Louis found she had little common with Knight's and Wheatley's all-absorbing interest in the occult. Crowley then became an MI5 agent. So Tom Dryburgh, a remarkable journalist and later a Labour Party MP, introduced him, but then Dryburgh warned him that Crowley had been responsible for running a community in northern Sicily where a number of children had been rumoured to have disappeared in connection with satanic masses. So he warns Wheatley off. But he wasn't put off. So they met Crowley, had the manner and voice of an Oxford don, said his own grace, embroidering Rabelais, do what you like, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. On Her Majesty's satanic request, and here he is. Rolling Stones made an album called that. The links became clear. Wheatley, Knight and Ian Fleming were the chief architects of the ruse to co-opt Crowley for the purpose of luring Nazi Rudolf Hess to parachute into Scotland. This is quite a well-known story. Rudolf Hess was very interested in the occult, astrology. He was one of the Nazi occult guys. So they were all fascinated with each other, and they were all spies, and they were all into the occult. But Dennis Wheatley's books are hugely informative. He does go into the history of the occult in it, talks about magic spells, talks about this, that and the other, and quite a lot of his books as well involve some sort of German or French or European spy connection. So when I started to have these bad dreams, my mum got these books, or the book that I was currently reading, and burned it. She actually burned it. And I was upset because I thought, I've got to give her the book back. And my mum said, she's not having the book back. I don't care. I'm sick and fed up with this. That's all you ever do. That's all you're interested in. It ends now. And at the same time at school, as this was going on, we had this going on. The Ouija board. Communicating with the dead was common. It's hard to imagine that now. So it was, the Ouija board was developed as a toy, almost like a recreational pastime. Speak to the dead, speak with your relatives. And people didn't really worry too much, I don't think. It was like, so you have a board with a planchette, hello and goodbye, yes or no, and all the numbers going round, and people would put their fingertips on the planchette, pose a question and watch as it moved around, spelled out things, told you stuff. It was usually used to be made in wood, but now it's cardboard or plastic. It came out of the American 19th century obsession with spiritualism and the belief that the dead are able to communicate with the living. Now, when we were at school, we didn't have one of these. We just make our own. We tore bits of paper up into the alphabet and had a yes and a no and did it on a table. I don't know who introduced it, where they got their idea from, because we were 14-year-olds and they came in and they said, we got this thing, if you do this, you'll contact the dead. You can only have got it from adults, surely. And some very, very weird stuff happened, to the point where our headmaster at school had to stop us doing it because girls were getting affected, and girls weren't coming into school because things that they were hearing on the Ouija board. And I heard something strange because I was very wary of the Ouija board seances at school, and I only ever did it once. I used to sit and watch them, and they really got into it. They were contacting this person in Wales, and they were getting all sorts of information about where she was and how she died. It was really creepy. But I asked the Ouija board for the name of my first dog, and it spelt it out, and that was enough for me. I was already sort of like starting to get a little bit freaked out by the reading of the books and the dreams I was having, and it was creepy stuff, creepy times. And I think that I got turned away from it after that, and I wasn't interested. I still had this sort of dark interest in ghost stories. In fact, I've written 3 or 4 horror ghost stories, and they've all got this sort of like M.R. James, tales of mystery and imagination like feel to them. I always sort of loved this gothic sort of horror, like dark. I've been brain trained. I've been occulted, and I hate it. I really don't like it. Hard on the back of all this stuff came this. I was about 20, 21 when this came out, if that. And this. And they were just ghastly, horrible films. And the other thing about the 1970s, of course, is that colour television made its appearance. So with colour television you could get like garish blood, you can get the effects, lots of blood, red eyes, stakes being driven into hearts, blood spurting out. So it's just a little look at how these things are, because it's all happening again now. Everybody's really looking at witchcraft. There's a lot of popular films on Netflix, Sabrina the Witch, all this talk of witchcraft in the press, and witches are doing this and witches are doing that, and you know, it's wrong. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please comment and tell me, let me know if you've ever been affected by this sort of thing. I mean, these films that were out, there were these Hammer horror films. Our local cinema, I meant to say it earlier, used to run all-night films, and we were 14 and 15 going in, and they let us in, and we'd stay there all night. It's mad. Same in town Weymouth, all night horror, and it was like you just go and sit all night watching these bloody horror films. It was like sort of a rites of passage. Oh, have you been down to the all night horror? Wrong. So many levels.